May 2nd, 1945, Peenemunde, Baltic coast. The air smells of salt and smoke. The once secret German rocket base lies in ruins. Hangars gutted, laboratories, burned documents scattered like confetti. Waves crash against the shore as U.S. Army trucks roll in. Colonel Holger Toftoy leads the convoy. His men fan out through the wreckage, weapons ready, though the fighting ended days ago. Jesus, a sergeant, mutters, "This place looks like the moon." Toftoy nods. That's exactly what they were trying to reach. Before them lies the birthplace of the V-2 rocket, Hitler's weapon of vengeance too. The first human-made object to reach the edge of space. Toftoy scans the ruins. In the distance, a group of German scientists stands outside a dome. One steps forward, tall, young, in a white coat. "That's him," says Toftoy's aide. "That's von Braun." Dr. Wernher von Braun approaches, arm in a cast, flanked by his team Stuhlinger Rudolph and General Dornberger. Colonel von Braun says softly, "I am here to surrender myself and my staff to the United States Army." "You realize the Russians are 50 miles away," Toftoy replies. Von Braun glances east. "Yes, that is why we came west." The V-2, built by forced labor, launched from hidden sites, had struck London, Antwerp, and Paris. Thousands dead, millions terrified. But to von Braun, it had never been vengeance. "My interest in rockets," he said, "is purely in their potential to reach space. Now amid ruins that dream lies, shattered yet perhaps reborn. The Americans don't know it yet, but they've captured the greatest prize of the war, the men who invented modern rocketry." Inside the labs, they find blueprints, rocket bodies, gyroscopes, telemetry instruments, an entire space program in pieces. Colonel and engineer calls, "You've got to see this." Toftoy steps into a bunker. A complete V-2 stands in the center, gleaming black. "Get it cataloged," Toftoy says, "and don't let the Russians near it. The race is on, not just for Germany, but for the future of the world." As the U.S. secures Peenemunde, Soviet teams, led by Sergei Korolev, scour factories to the east, hunting scientists and rocket parts. Whoever captures Germany's engineers will command the next century. Von Braun tells Toftoy, "Colonel, if we are to continue our work, it must be with you, not the Russians." Toftoy asks why. Von Braun smiles faintly. "Because you will let me look at the stars, not Siberia." Within 48 hours, over 100 scientists surrender with briefcases full of blueprints and notes, a decade of research in their hands. Toftoy sends a coded message to Washington, recommend immediate evacuation of Peenemunde personnel. Strategic importance extreme. The reply, authorization granted. Priority 1. The order soon gains a name, Operation Paperclip. The trucks roll south through the night, loaded with men and machines that will soon rewrite the boundaries of war and peace. The Americans think they're bringing home the architects of the V-2 rocket. They don't yet realize they're importing the architects of the space age. May 11th, 1945, near Oberammergau, Bavaria. The war in Europe is over, but the chase has just begun. American jeeps climb through the Alps, carrying U.S. intelligence officers, hunting Germany's rocket scientists before the Soviets arrive. Major Robert Staver rides in the lead jeep, briefcase full of intercepted documents. "Slow down," he says. "Reuter's just ahead." In the valley below, a mountain lodge hides the greatest minds of Germany's war machine, von Braun, Rudolph, and their team. Inside, papers cover every table, blueprints, equations, test data. Families huddle outside by a campfire, waiting for their fate. Von Braun hears the engines and sighs. "Gentlemen," he says, "it appears our future has arrived." Moments later, Major Staver steps inside. "Dr. von Braun." "Yes. You've been expecting us." "Indeed." Von Braun gestures to the documents. 15 years of rocket research, the complete V-2 archive. Engine blueprints, launch data guidance systems. Staver kneels to examine the files. His pulse quickens. "You're surrendering them voluntarily." "We would rather our work serve science than revenge." For days, Staver's team catalogs everything. Crates marked Peenemunde Archive are shipped to Paris, then Washington. The scientists are moved to Witzenhausen under Operation Overcast, the first stage of what will become Operation Paperclip. But investigations into war crimes at Mittelbau-Dora threaten the plan. Tolstoy hesitates. We can't bring Nazis into America. Staver insists, if we don't, the Soviets will. After a long silence, Tolstoy says, all right, get them out. Clean the paperwork. Meanwhile, Soviet forces seize the Mittelwerk tunnels, discovering half-built V-2s and hundreds of dead laborers. The Soviets take machinery blueprints and engineers, including Helmut Gruttrup, who will later design the first Soviet guidance systems. A Russian officer remarks, the Americans got the brains, we got the hands. In Bavaria, von Braun's group is split into convoys, their identities changed, political affiliations erased. The codename Paperclip. At night, they listen to radio reports, Germany's surrender, Hitler's death. Von Braun writes, the dream of space did not die in Berlin. It merely changed uniforms. In June, orders arrived to transfer the scientists to Camp Overcast. Their families remain behind leverage for cooperation. At departure, Magnus von Braun jokes. At least the Americans have good coffee. Wernher replies. We're not free, Magnus. Not yet. The convoy heads south toward the American zone trucks full of men who once built weapons of terror, now carrying the future of humanity. Staver telegraphs Washington primary Peenemunde personnel secured. Recommend immediate transfer to U.S. scientific potential unparalleled. Generals argue in secret. We can't recruit war criminals if we don't, the Soviets will. The Cold War has already begun. By September 127th, scientists von Braun's core team are cleared for transport to Fort Bliss, Texas. As their plane lifts off from Munich, von Braun looks east toward the ruins of Peenemunde, then west toward a new horizon. He whispers to the stars through difficulty. The engines drone on, carrying the rocket men from one empire into another. November 16, 1945, Fort Bliss, Texas. The desert wind carries the smell of dust and oil across the new home of Operation Paperclip. A convoy of trucks arrives carrying German scientists in U.S. uniforms. Their names are false, their mission classified. Colonel Holger Tolstoy greets them. Welcome to Texas, he says. You're here to work, but make no mistake, you're still under observation. Dr. Wernher von Braun replies, our team will serve faithfully. Tolstoy answers. Then let's make sure your rockets serve better purposes this time. Inside the German village, the scientists live under guard, part prison, part paradise. They rebuild their labs with army pencils and ration paper. Each man is assigned to Project Hermes, officially to study captured rocket tech, but in truth, the birth of America's missile program. December 15, 1945, White Sands Proving Ground. A V-2 rocket stands ready under the New Mexico sun, black and white against the desert sky. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition flame erupts. The rocket climbs, trailing fire, disappearing into the heavens. It arcs, then falls, slamming into the sand with a thunderous roar. Applause erupts, but von Braun only whispers, still a weapon. For the next 3 years, the Germans teach. They train U.S. engineers in rocket assembly, telemetry, and guidance systems. Young American officers who once fought Germany now study under its former scientists. Hard to hate a man who can explain differential thrust, one jokes. The shadow of war lingers. The scientist's mail is censored, movements restricted, but a fragile trust begins to grow. Meanwhile, Soviet teams test captured V-2s near Moscow. The race that began in Peenemunde isn't over, it's only changed hands. By 1947, Operation Paperclip expands. Over 700 German scientists arrive, not just rocketeers, but physicists, chemists, and engineers. Their Nazi pasts are erased under new biographies. The paperclips holding their dossiers become the symbol of the entire operation. Publicly, Washington says nothing. Privately, officials admit every German scientist kept from the Soviets is a victory in the new war. That same year, von Braun lectures at Fort Bliss. The conquest of space is not if, but when. Few believe him, but his dream won't fade. Reporters uncover hints of the secret program. One headline reads, Hitler's rocket men work for Uncle Sam. The War Department denies it. Protests fade beneath fear of the Soviet threat. The logic is simple: if America doesn't use them, Moscow will. By 1949, the desert sky glows nightly with fire. New rockets, longer, faster, deadlier, rise from the sands of New Mexico. Project Hermes evolves into Project Bumper Corporal and Redstone. The names change, but the fingerprints of Peenemunde remain. Von Braun writes by lamplight, sketching designs for multi-stage rockets and orbiting satellites, ideas for a world not yet ready to listen. He keeps one drawing folded in his pocket, a rocket rising beyond Earth, labeled in neat English Stage 2 separation. In less than a decade, these men will become heroes. But first, their knowledge will forge the next weapon of the atomic age. The V2 may have fallen silent in New Mexico, but its children will rise again under new names, new colors, and a new flag. October 1949. Washington, D.C. The Pentagon's briefing room hums with low voices. Charts and black and white photographs are pinned to the walls, long, slender rockets streaking skyward from the sands of New Mexico. The air smells faintly of coffee and cigarette smoke. At the front of the room, Colonel Holger Toftoy stands beside a tall, confident man in civilian clothes. The latter adjusts his glasses and taps a pointer against the image of a missile labeled Hermes A4. Gentlemen, he begins in his clipped German-accented English, "This is the beginning of your future." The speaker is Dr. Wernher von Braun, once the pride of Peenemunde, now chief technical consultant to the U.S. Army Ordnance Department. Around the table sit generals, engineers, and intelligence officers. They listen closely, some with admiration, others with lingering distrust. Von Braun continues outlining advances in rocket performance, liquid oxygen fueling, and guidance control. He speaks of supersonic flight, intercontinental ranges, and the potential for delivering atomic payloads across oceans. When he finishes, there's a long silence. Then one general leans forward. "Doctor, can you build one that reaches Moscow?" Von Braun hesitates. "Technically, yes. But my interest—" "We're not asking about your interest," the general cuts in. "We're asking about capability." Von Braun's jaw tightens. He glances at Toftoy, who gives a subtle nod. "Then yes, General," he says. "We can." In the aftermath of World War II, the uneasy alliance between the U.S. and the Soviet Union has turned into a cold, silent hostility. The Soviets have detonated their first atomic bomb. China is falling under communist control. Across the Atlantic, Europe trembles at the thought of another arms race, this one fought not by tanks and soldiers, but by scientists. And in the middle of it all stands the legacy of Peenemunde, the rocket. The Army's Project Hermes, born from captured German designs, evolves rapidly. Within 2 years, it produces test vehicles capable of reaching 150 miles altitude. At White Sands, launches become routine. Military observers gather behind bunkers as towering rockets roar skyward, their exhaust turning desert sand into glass. But every success fuels a darker ambition: range, payload, precision. The V2, once an engine of terror, becomes the seed of America's ballistic missile program. Von Braun's engineers, still mostly German, now work under Army supervision in a new facility, Redstone Arsenal, near Huntsville, Alabama. The locals call them the German scientists, half in awe, half in suspicion. When the first team arrives in 1950, the Alabama heat feels alien after years in the desert of New Mexico. Cotton fields stretch for miles, and Baptist church bells ring through the morning haze. The city is small, quiet, but inside the newly established Ordnance-Guided Missile Center, history is stirring again. Von Braun walks the hall's blueprint tubes under his arm as Southern technicians stare curiously at the tall, formal man with a foreign accent and movie star bearing. He sets up laboratories, testing stands, drafting rooms. Within months, the facility hums with the same rhythm as Peenemunde once did: slide rules, clicking typewriters, clattering engines, howling on the test stand. One Army officer watching from a distance mutters to a colleague, "Feels like we imported a piece of Germany." Under von Braun's direction, the team develops the Redstone missile, a direct descendant of the V2, but longer, stronger, and far more accurate. It can carry a nuclear warhead over 200 miles. At the same time, other branches of the military pursue their own paths. The Air Force develops the Atlas program, the Navy, the Viking. Competition is fierce, bureaucratic, and political. But in the Cold War's shadow, competition is survival. By 1952, American generals are convinced that whoever controls space, even the space above Earth, will control the future. The Soviet Union has already captured many of Germany's remaining engineers, now working in Kuibyshev under Sergei Korolev. They too are testing rockets building toward something beyond war. The race that began in rubble now spans hemispheres. Meanwhile, von Braun's personal transformation accelerates. He writes articles for Collier's magazine, arguing that rockets can be used not only for warfare, but for exploration. The first issue is titled "Man Will Conquer Space Soon" and shows vivid illustrations of space stations and lunar landings. In one image, a gleaming rocket arcs above the Earth, emblazoned not with the Iron Cross, but the American flag. Toftoy visits Huntsville and holds up the magazine with a smirk. "You always did think big, Wernher." Von Braun grins. "Colonel, a man who can build a rocket to kill can build one to climb. Just make sure it climbs before the Russians do," Toftoy replies. But the ghosts of this past are not so easily buried. In 1951, the U.S. Justice Department begins reviewing Operation Paperclip records. Questions surface about the scientists' wartime activities, their roles in the use of forced labor at Mittelwerk, their SS affiliations, their oaths to Hitler. Reporters catch wind of the investigations. A headline in the Washington Post reads, "Peenemunde's shadow follows rocket men to Alabama." The public outcry forces the Army to issue statements. These individuals were technical experts, not political figures. Their work now serves peace. Privately, von Braun grows weary of defending himself. History, he tells his colleague Ernst Stuhlinger one night, is written by those who reach the stars first. We must make sure it's us. The Cold War intensifies. In Korea, American jets clash with Soviet-built MiGs. At home, Senator McCarthy's hearings sweep through government ranks. Suspicion of foreigners, even useful ones, grows. Yet through it all, the rockets continue to rise. By 1953, the first Redstone prototype stands on the pad. Engineers in hard hats check fuel lines as technicians crank open the gantry arms. The missile gleams under the floodlights, 70 feet tall, its surface etched with condensation. Von Braun stands beside Major General John Madaris, the Army's missile chief. "Ready when you are," Wernher Madaris says. Von Braun nods. "Let's make history." The ignition command is given. A burst of fire engulfs the pad, the roar flattening grass for miles. The Redstone lifts, slowly climbing into the Alabama dawn, leaving behind a trail of flame and smoke. The crowd erupts into cheers. Madaris slaps von Braun on the back. She flies. Von Braun watches silently, arms folded. "She flies," he says. "Now let's see how far." In Moscow, news of the test reaches Korolev within days. He smiles grimly and circles a date on his calendar, October 4th, 1957. He doesn't know yet what will happen that day, but the line is drawn. The race for space has already begun, and the men who once built Hitler's vengeance weapons are now building the future of humankind and the instruments of its destruction. October 4th, 1957. Moscow, USSR. A steady beep crackles through radios around the world. Beep, beep, beep. The signal is faint, rhythmic, almost innocent. But to those who understand it, is the sound of a revolution, the heartbeat of a new era. Atop a Soviet R-7 rocket, Sputnik 1, a polished aluminum sphere no bigger than a beach ball, has just entered orbit. It circles the Earth every 96 minutes, visible to anyone who looks up on a clear night. In the Kremlin, Nikita Khrushchev smiles broadly as his generals deliver the news. "Let the Americans see what their Germans could not do," he says. "We have touched the heavens before them." Across the world, that simple, monotonous beep strikes terror into the heart of the United States. In Huntsville, Alabama, Wernher von Braun is still in his office when the news breaks. A young Army engineer rushes in, face pale. "Sir, the Russians. They've launched something. It's in orbit." Von Braun sets down his pen. "In orbit, yes, sir. They're calling it Sputnik." For a moment, von Braun says nothing. The hum of the air conditioner fills the silence. Then he exhales sharply, almost in awe. Then the world just changed. He stands, walks to the window, and stares out at the dark Alabama sky. Somewhere up there, above the cotton clouds, humanity has escaped the Earth, and it wasn't under his flag. 2 days later, the Pentagon summons him to Washington. The briefing room is packed. Generals, senators, even a few stunned civilians from the new National Security Council. On a large screen, film footage of Sputnik plays on loop. The satellite gleams like a silver marble, its 4 thin antennae glinting against the void. This, says General John Madaris, is the greatest intelligence failure in American history. A senator slams his fist on the table. "They've beaten us to space with our own technology." Von Braun stands quietly at the edge of the room until Madaris gestures toward him. "Dr. von Braun," the general says, "perhaps you can explain how this happened." Von Braun clears his throat. "Gentlemen, the Soviets used the R-7, a direct evolution of our V-2 designs. They prioritized heavy lift capability. We, on the other hand, focused on warheads, not weight. If we'd been allowed to launch our Jupiter C vehicle last year..." The senator cuts him off. "You're saying this is our fault?" Von Braun doesn't flinch. "I am saying, sir, that if America does not act now, the next thing they launch will not beep, it will burn." The room falls silent. The point lands. Across the Atlantic, the Soviets celebrate. Sergei Korolev, the brilliant, secretive engineer behind Sputnik, reads reports of American panic with quiet satisfaction. For him, it's not about propaganda, it's about vindication. A decade earlier, he'd been a prisoner in Stalin's gulag, forced to labor while his dreams of spaceflight rotted behind barbed wire. Now his rocket has conquered the heavens. He scribbles a note to his deputy: "The Americans will answer this. And when they do, we must already be on the moon." In America, the response is swift and chaotic. Congress holds emergency hearings. Newspapers scream headlines of satellite shock and Reds win space race. The public demands answers. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, calm but stern, orders the creation of a civilian agency to coordinate space research. Within a year, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, will be born. But before NASA, there is von Braun. The Army authorizes him to modify the Jupiter C rocket into a satellite launcher. In 3 frantic months, his team at Redstone Arsenal works around the clock. Engineers sleep on drafting tables. Wives bring food to the test stands. The memory of Sputnik burns in everyone's mind. One night, an exhausted technician stumbles into von Braun's office, grease smeared across his face. "We're ready," he says. Von Braun nods slowly. "Then let's give the world something to look up to again." January 31st, 1958. Cape Canaveral, Florida. The wind is cold off the Atlantic. The launch pad glows under floodlights. Atop the Redstone missile sits Explorer 1, America's answer to Sputnik, a slim white cylinder carrying a small scientific payload designed by Dr. James Van Allen. Von Braun stands beside the console, arms folded, eyes fixed on the monitor. His voice is calm, but his pulse pounds in his ears. Countdown begins, calls the range officer. 10, 9, 8. He remembers Peenemunde, the fire, the chaos, the screams of V2 launches in war. But this time feels different. This time the rocket points toward the stars, not cities. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. The engines ignite with a thunderous roar. Flames engulf the pad and the rocket climbs slow at first, then faster, a streak of light against the night sky. Telemetry good. All stages normal, says the controller. Minutes later, the voice comes through the radio. Explorer 1 is in orbit. Von Braun exhales and removes his glasses. Around him, the room erupts in cheers. Engineers hug. Soldiers pound each other's backs. Reporters shout questions. But von Braun just whispers, "At last." And that night across America, radios buzz with the news. United States enters space. For the first time since Sputnik, the nation breathes easier. The beeping of the Soviet satellite is replaced by pride and competition. At Redstone Arsenal, the engineers celebrate quietly. A young lieutenant raises his glass of beer and says, "To Peenemunde." Von Braun raises his too, and after a pause adds softly, "To the future." But beyond the celebration lies a question no one can yet answer. If the rocket can carry a satellite into orbit, it can also carry a warhead across continents. And as the two superpowers race skyward, they are also arming themselves for destruction on a scale humanity has never seen. The space race has begun, but it is also a shadow war. And every launch, every triumph, every glowing arc of fire across the night sky carries the same unspoken truth: the path to the stars is paved with weapons. March 1958. Huntsville, Alabama. The morning sun cuts through the mist that hangs over Redstone Arsenal. Inside the long corrugated hangars, engineers in khaki shirts crowd around drafting tables, slide rules in hand, tracing arcs of flight that extend beyond the earth. The air smells of graphite and coffee. On the wall hangs a newspaper clipping of Explorer 1's orbit, with U.S. enters space, underlined in red pencil. Someone has scribbled beneath it. And this is only the beginning. At a table near the window, Dr. Wernher von Braun reviews a set of sketches: vast ring-shaped space stations, nuclear-powered rockets, and lunar bases. They're labeled Project Horizon, a concept paper for a permanent U.S. military outpost on the moon. Across from him sits Major General John Madaris, his commanding officer. "Wernher, you're 10 years ahead of yourself," Madaris says, half amused. Von Braun looks up, eyes gleaming. "That's what progress always is, John, 10 years ahead of permission." By mid-1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration officially absorbs von Braun's team from the Army. Redstone Arsenal becomes the Marshall Space Flight Center, and the German-born engineers are reclassified as civilian specialists. The transition is quiet but historic. The same men who once built V2s for Hitler now work for NASA, designing machines of exploration. Toftoy retires soon after watching his protege rise higher than either of them ever imagined. "Just remember where we started," he tells von Braun in a farewell letter. "The line between war and wonder is thinner than you think." Von Braun folds the letter carefully and keeps it in his desk for the rest of his life. Across the world, the Soviets push forward. Korolev's R-7 launches Laika, the first living creature in orbit. Then Luna 2, the first probe to impact the moon. The world watches in awe and in fear. The space race becomes the stage on which the superpowers measure not just technology, but ideology. At the Pentagon, new phrases appear in reports: missile gap, space, superiority, orbital deterrence. Every scientific breakthrough is weighed against its military potential. And in that delicate balance stands von Braun, a man whose genius is now the weapon of both peace and deterrence. At Cape Canaveral, under a humid Florida dawn, the Redstone-derived Jupiter rocket stands ready for another launch. But this time the payload is human, a mock-up capsule, the first step toward Project Mercury, America's manned space program. Von Braun watches from the blockhouse headset pressed to his ear. Ignition calls the controller. Flame blooms, and the rocket rises slow, steady, defiant. It reaches the upper atmosphere before its escape system triggers perfectly, hurling the capsule free. The test is a success. Gentleman von Braun says to his team, "We are ready to carry men." That same year, the first Mercury astronauts, the Mercury 7, visit Huntsville. Dressed in crisp flight suits, they walk through the labs like demigods. Test pilots, engineers, soldiers, men who have risked their lives in supersonic flight, now preparing to risk them in space. One of them, Alan Shepard, shakes von Braun's hand firmly. "Doctor, when do you think we'll be ready to fly?" Von Braun smiles. When the rocket stops exploding. The two share a laugh. Beneath it, they both know how fragile success will be. Back in his office, von Braun writes an essay titled, "Why Man Must Go into Space." He argues not for military dominance, but for destiny. Man's urge to explore is as old as his hunger for knowledge, he writes. The rocket born from war now becomes the instrument of peace, the means by which we reach for our true home among the stars. The essay circulates quietly through NASA and the press. Some see idealism, others redemption. For von Braun, it is both. April 12th. The world changes again. A Soviet voice crackles through static. "This is Major Yuri Gagarin. I am in orbit." For the second time in his life, von Braun watches as another nation achieves what he had dreamed of first. The room at Marshall is silent. Engineers stare at the radio, some pale with disbelief. Madaris, now retired but visiting that day, mutters, "They beat us again." Von Braun sets his jaw. "Then we will make sure they never beat us to the moon." 3 weeks later, Alan Shepard becomes the first American in space, a 15-minute suborbital flight aboard Freedom 7 powered by von Braun's Redstone rocket. The crowd at Cape Canaveral erupts in cheers. The capsule splashes down in the Atlantic. Recovery teams rush forward. Shepard drenched but grinning radios, "It was a beautiful ride." Von Braun watches this footage on a small monitor in the control room. His expression is calm, but his eyes are glassy. "It has begun," he whispers. That evening, President John F. Kennedy addresses Congress. The world leans in as he declares, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth." The chamber erupts in applause. And somewhere in Huntsville, von Braun leans back in his chair, the weight of the impossible pressing on his shoulders. He turns to his engineers. "Gentlemen, the President has just given us our marching orders." Someone in the back mutters, "To the moon." Von Braun smiles faintly. "To history. The rockets that once carried warheads will now carry men." And as the world watches, the former enemy scientists of Operation Paperclip prepare to deliver humanity's greatest leap. But behind every triumph lies a shadow, one that still whispers of the past and of the price of progress. July 1962. Huntsville, Alabama. The air at Redstone Arsenal vibrates with the deep, resonant growl of rocket engines. Out on the test stand, a cluster of massive F-1 engines ignites in unison, spewing torrents of flame and smoke. The sound rolls across the valley like thunder. Windows rattle for miles. Inside the blockhouse, men in white shirts and black ties hunch over consoles. The instruments quiver, needles dancing in rhythm with the roar outside. The lights flicker from the strain of power. At the center of the room stands Dr. Wernher von Braun, eyes fixed on the vibration gauge. "Steady," he murmurs. "Hold it at 90%. The test operator glances at his stopwatch. 30 seconds, sir." "Make it 40, von Braun replies. "Let her breathe." When the cutoff comes, the sudden silence feels like a vacuum. A moment later, a cheer erupts the F-1s have held. The engines that will lift men beyond Earth have roared for the first time. Von Braun allows himself a rare smile. "Gentlemen," he says, "the Saturn has awakened." The Saturn program, born from von Braun's earlier Jupiter designs, is the most ambitious engineering project in human history. Under NASA's newly formed Marshall Space Flight Center, his team, now thousands strong, works around the clock to create a launch vehicle capable of carrying astronauts to the moon. Each Saturn rocket will stand taller than the Statue of Liberty, weigh as much as a destroyer, and produce 7.5 million pounds of thrust. To most engineers, it sounds impossible. To von Braun, it sounds familiar. "You must remember," he tells a young technician at Peenemunde, "they said the same thing. The work consumes every waking hour. Drafting rooms buzz with the chatter of engineers and the scratch of pencils. Calculations are done by hand. Mistakes can cost millions. Every bolt, every valve, every wire must be perfect." Von Braun walks the corridors daily, his presence both inspiring and intimidating. He knows every subsystem by heart, propulsion guidance structures. His German precision clashes sometimes with American informality, but his team learns to follow his rhythm measure: twice test, once pray never. In the evenings, he drives home through the quiet streets of Huntsville, now nicknamed Rocket City, USA. Churches, diners, and schools all bear the mark of the new space age. The town that once eyed the German engineers with suspicion now celebrates them. Children dress as astronauts for Halloween. Shops sell rocket burgers. And every Sunday, the congregation prays for good weather at the Cape. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Sergei Korolev pushes his own team to the brink. The Soviet Union's N-1 rocket program races to match the Americans, but progress is plagued by secrecy, bureaucracy, and technical failure. Korolev writes in his diary, "We race the Americans with no fuel, no time, and no mercy. The stars are close, but death is closer. Neither he nor von Braun knows it yet, but only one of their rockets will ever touch the moon." By 1965, the first Saturn Y and Saturn IB rockets roar successfully from Cape Kennedy. Each test brings the United States closer to the moon. Von Braun's office overflows with models, blueprints, and mission charts. On the wall hangs a photograph of President Kennedy visiting Marshall in 1963, smiling beside him. The caption reads, "We choose to go to the moon." But as the dream grows, so does the pressure. Budgets balloon. Congress demands results. Engineers complain of exhaustion. The Apollo spacecraft, being developed by North American Aviation, faces setbacks and design conflicts. One night after a failed test at the Cape, von Braun gathers his team in a small conference room. "Gentlemen," he says quietly, "the dream of spaceflight is no longer a dream. It's a schedule. And the schedule does not care if we are ready." In 1966, tragedy strikes close to home. During a static test in Huntsville, a fuel line ruptures, engulfing a test stand in flames. 2 technicians are killed. Von Braun arrives minutes later, still in his white shirt and tie. He walks silently among the smoldering wreckage, face pale, jaw clenched. When the flames are out, he removes his hat and murmurs, "We build toward the heavens, and yet we are reminded what waits below." He orders a full redesign of the fuel system. No corners cut, no compromises. Yet even as the technical challenges mount, von Braun's vision grows clearer. He speaks often to the press, to schools, to Congress, not in the language of weapons or defense, but of exploration. "We are the species that must leave its cradle," he tells a Senate hearing. The rocket is not a tool of war, but of awakening. His eloquence wins hearts. His results silence critics. And with every successful test, the impossible draws closer. By late 1967, the Saturn V, the mightiest rocket ever built, stands complete. 363 feet tall, 5 F-1 engines at its base, it gleams under the floodlights of the Vehicle Assembly Building, the cathedral of modern engineering. On the night of the final pre-flight inspection, von Braun walks the gantry alone, the Atlantic wind whipping his coat. He places his hand on the rocket's cold skin and whispers in German, "Mein Gott, sie ist schön." My God, she is beautiful. He doesn't yet know that the coming year will bring both triumph and heartbreak, and that his creation, born from war and redemption alike, will soon carry humanity where no one has ever gone before. January 27th, 1967. Cape Kennedy, Florida. The Florida air is damp and heavy with the smell of salt. In the White Room at Launch Complex 34, 3 astronauts climb into the Apollo 1 command module for a routine plugs-out test. Gus Grissom, veteran pilot, and one of the Mercury 7 straps into the left seat. Ed White, the first American to walk in space, takes the right. Between them sits Roger Chaffee, the rookie eyes bright with focus. Technicians outside the capsule check communications and power lines. All systems nominal, the test conductor reports. Proceeding with cabin pressurization. Then a hiss, a spark, a flash. Within seconds, the cabin erupts in fire. Pure oxygen turns the test chamber into a furnace. The astronauts' screams echo through the intercom. "We've got a fire in the cockpit," followed by static. The pressure spike blows the hatch outward, but rescuers are too late. In less than 30 seconds, all 3 men are dead. That night, the launch pad still glows with embers. Engineers and technicians stand in stunned silence, faces illuminated by floodlights. The burnt smell clings to everything metal, fabric, air. Von Braun arrives from Huntsville just before midnight. He walks straight to the pad, ignoring the reporters, ignoring the military police. When he sees the blackened capsule, his expression doesn't change, but his shoulders slump, as if bearing the weight of the entire Saturn V. "Where did we fail them?" he whispers. No one answers. The investigation that follows shakes NASA to its core. Congressional hearings are brutal. Newspapers question whether America's race to the moon has outpaced its conscience. In the Senate chamber, von Braun faces the microphones. His English, once confident, falters slightly. We were too focused on reaching the moon," he admits. "We forgot that we must first make the journey safe." Senators press him on the details, wiring flaws, flammable materials, procedural lapses. He answers every question with precision, never deflecting blame. Yet when asked whether the dream of Apollo should continue, his reply is steady. "If we stop now, we will have lost them twice." In Huntsville, morale sinks. Engineers who once joked about riding thunder now work in near silence. Every bolt, every wire is rechecked, redesigned, retested. Von Braun orders that no component, not even a screw, be signed off without 2 independent verifications. He tells his deputy, Dr. Eberhard Rees, "We will not let another man die for haste." The redesign takes nearly 2 years. The spacecraft that emerges, Apollo Block 2, is stronger, safer, and smarter. But its cost is measured in more than dollars. It's measured in guilt. Meanwhile, the world moves on. In Vietnam, jungles burn under napalm. In Detroit, riots light the night sky. The same engines that might one day push mankind to the stars are used to propel missiles across the Pacific. The contrast gnaws at von Braun. "We dream of the heavens," he writes, "but cannot stop burning the earth." Yet he keeps working because the alternative, surrendering to despair, feels like betrayal. November 9th, 1967. Launchpad 39A. The Saturn V stands poised, white and magnificent against the blue Florida sky. The rocket's 7.5 million pounds of thrust dwarf anything before it. Its 3 stages hold enough energy to lift the Statue of Liberty into orbit twice. This is the test flight, Apollo 4, unmanned but critical. It will prove whether the Saturn V can survive the violent climb to space. Von Braun stands in the control room, headset on. The countdown voice echoes 10, 9, 8. The engines ignite with a roar that shakes the Atlantic coast. The sky flashes orange. The air itself seems to split open. The rocket rises majestically, trailing fire. Liftoff. We have liftoff of Apollo 4. Von Braun grips the console, eyes wet. Around him, engineers cheer, but he says nothing. Only after the first stage separates cleanly does he whisper, "Gus, Ed, Roger, this one's for you." By 1968, Apollo's confidence is restored. Apollo 7 carries men back into orbit. Apollo 8 circles the moon on Christmas Eve, transmitting the haunting image of Earth rising over the lunar horizon, a blue marble adrift in darkness. The broadcast moves the world. Even the Cold War pauses, if only for a moment, as people everywhere stare at that fragile globe and hear the astronauts read from Genesis, and God said, "Let there be light." Von Braun watches from his Huntsville office. When the transmission ends, he sits quietly for a long time, then says to Reese, "Now they see what I saw at Peenemunde, not war, but wonder." Yet even as the dream nears fulfillment, politics tighten around him. Senators demand budget cuts. Critics call the moon race a waste of money. Protesters outside NASA carry signs, "Poverty before planets." To many, von Braun is still the outsider, the German with the dark past. Rumors resurface about his SS membership, his silence during the war, the slave labor of Mittelwerk. When asked how he reconciles his past, he answers quietly, "My moral compass is imperfect, but I believe a man can turn his work from destruction toward creation if he is allowed to try." July 16, 1969. Dawn at Cape Kennedy. The Saturn V, his masterpiece, stands ready for the final test. 3 men will ride it into history: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. In the pre-dawn light, the gantry glows like a cathedral. 1 million people gather along the beaches. Von Braun watches from the firing room as the countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. The engines ignite 5 pillars of fire, shaking the earth. The Saturn V lifts slowly, gracefully, into the heavens. Liftoff. We have liftoff of Apollo 11. As it climbs, von Braun presses a hand against the glass, whispering in German, "Flieg, meine Kinder. Flieg. Fly, my children. Fly." The room is silent except for the sound of history ascending. July 20th. 1969. Sea of Tranquility, the Moon. The radio crackles inside NASA's Mission Control in Houston. Cigarette smoke hangs thick in the air. Coffee cups line the consoles. Engineers lean forward, faces pale, hearts pounding. On the big screen, telemetry data scrolls endlessly: altitude, velocity, fuel. The Apollo 11 lunar module Eagle is descending. Neil Armstrong's voice cuts through static. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." For a moment, no one breathes. Then, pandemonium. Applause, shouting, tears. The room explodes in emotion. Men who haven't slept in 3 days hug like brothers. In Huntsville, Wernher von Braun stands frozen before a television, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile breaks across his face. He exhales as though letting go of a lifetime. On the screen, Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Von Braun closes his eyes. At last, he murmurs, "The dream that began in the bombed laboratories of Peenemunde has reached its destination." Outside NASA's Marshall Center that night, thousands of people gather spontaneously. They hold candles and look up at the glowing orb above, whispering to each other. There are men up there. An old machinist weeps quietly. "We built that ladder," he says. Von Braun arrives just before midnight. A crowd surrounds his car. "Dr. von Braun. Dr. von Braun," they shout. "You did it!" He steps out, waves politely, then lifts his gaze skyward. "We did it," he says softly. In Moscow, Sergei Korolev's successors watch the same broadcast in silence. Korolev himself has been dead for 3 years, his identity still classified. His engineers who once led the race now study American television through clenched jaws and quiet respect. For all the rivalry, there is a shared truth: both sides know what it cost to reach the moon. Back in Huntsville, von Braun's team celebrates with champagne and exhaustion. Engineers who once spoke German curses now toast in English. To Peenemunde says one, to Apollo says another. Von Braun raises his glass last. To humanity, he says. The room falls silent. For a moment they are not Germans or Americans, just travelers who have finally seen the map completed. In the weeks that follow, Apollo 11 becomes legend. Ticker tape parades, television specials, commemorative stamps. Von Braun travels with the astronauts to Washington, where President Nixon presents them with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The cameras flash. The reporters shout questions. One journalist calls out, "Did you ever imagine this day when you were building the V2?" Von Braun pauses, eyes distant. "Yes," he replies quietly, "but never like this." Behind the triumph, however, lies an emptiness. The mission is over. The goal achieved. Within NASA budgets, shrink interest wanes. Congress argues that the job is done, there's nothing left to prove. Von Braun senses it before anyone else. They do not understand, he tells a colleague. Reaching the moon was never the end. It was only the first step. But the political winds have shifted. America is turning inward: Vietnam, civil rights, social unrest. Rockets feel like relics of a fading dream. Von Braun is appointed NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator for Planning. It sounds like a promotion, but in truth, it's exile from the heart of engineering. The man who built the greatest rocket in history now sits behind a desk in Washington, surrounded by bureaucracy and politics. He still writes, still dreams of Mars, of orbital colonies, of interplanetary exploration, but fewer people are listening. The Cold War has cooled, and with détente comes complacency. When Apollo 17 launches in 1972, the final moon mission, von Braun watches from his office window far from the pad, a solitary figure framed against the glow of a setting sun. After this, he whispers, no one will come for a very long time. In the following years, he gives lectures and interviews trying to keep the flame alive. His speeches blend science and philosophy, often ending with the same line, man is the only creature who looks up and wonders. It is our duty to answer the sky. Students adore him. Politicians tolerate him. His once feared accent becomes familiar. His name no longer foreign, but foundational. And yet whenever he hears thunder, he thinks of the F-1 engines, the sound that once shook the heavens. By the mid-1970s, his health begins to fail. He is diagnosed with kidney cancer. Friends say he grows quieter, more reflective. He moves to Alexandria, Virginia, where he spends long evenings gazing at the moon through a small backyard telescope. When asked by a young journalist if he believes in redemption, he answers slowly, I believe in responsibility. The hands that once built weapons can also build wings. That is all the redemption I need. On June 16, 1977, Wernher von Braun dies at age 65. NASA lowers its flags to half-mast. President Carter issues a statement calling him a man who helped humanity touch the stars. In Huntsville, the workers of Marshall Space Flight Center gather outside the test stand where the first Saturn roared to life. They observe a minute of silence. Then, as if on cue, a summer storm rolls in thunder, rumbling across the valley. Someone whispers, he's testing engines again. In the decades that follow, the world he helped shape continues to evolve. Satellites map the Earth, probes explore Mars, and humans live in orbit aboard the International Space Station, all built on the bones of his rockets. Peenemunde lies in ruins now, a museum by the Baltic Sea. Tourists walk among the cracked launch pads and rusted gantries. A plaque reads, "From these stones mankind reached the moon." The line between destruction and discovery remains etched in history, and in the conscience of every scientist who dreams beyond the horizon. In the end, the story of Operation Paperclip is not one of simple heroes or villains, but of a fragile truth. Knowledge can be both salvation and sin, depending on the hands that hold it. And as long as mankind builds machines that climb toward the heavens, the echoes of those who built the first will never fade. Their legacy is written not just in the sky, but in every question we still dare to ask when we look up at the stars.